In this video, we are going to talk about an interface in Adobe Photoshop called Camera Raw. Camera Raw is an interface that allows you to edit and enhance photography, color correct photography. It's a feature that was put in Photoshop quite a while ago, and it enables the designer and photographer to edit the raw photo format. And the raw photo format is a format that digital cameras will shoot. It's rather than get into an explanation of raw, basically raw captures all of the tonal range of a photo, a lot more of what they call the dynamic range of a photo. And more highlights, more shadows, whereas a JPEG only captures a certain amount. So if this is the total amount of tonal range in a photo, this is a JPEG. This is what Camera Raw will capture. Much more highlight detail, more shadow detail. So that's the simple answer. If you have a camera that does shoot RAW, you want to shoot in that camera format. Otherwise, you can still edit a JPEG in Adobe's Camera Raw. And so I want to talk about that because that's probably the most common thing that you're going to come across. You're going to be shooting JPEGs and you're going to have to, edit those in Camera Raw. But if you do have raw photos, they do come out a lot better. And for those of you that have the ability to shoot raw, I would do that if you're going to edit and process the photos. You can also shoot raw format in a mobile device, in a cell phone. Just go to your settings and go to your camera and follow the instructions on how to activate the raw camera format. And most, I know, Samsung phones now after 2020 will shoot in the raw format. I'm not sure about Apple, but I'm sure Apple does that too. Okay, let's get started with this. Let me share my screen and I'm going to go right to our what I'm going to be posting soon, and that's going to be this little tutorial here on Camera Raw in Photoshop. So I'm going to click on that. And basically it says that Camera Raw is an interface in Photoshop that allows you to enhance and color correct photos quickly and easily. It is not a substitute, however, for complex adjustment layers and layer masks in the main interface of Photoshop. So if you really want to get into like very complex things, a lot of the features that Photoshop has, you're not going to be able to do that in Camera Raw. But the fact that Camera Raw is in Photoshop means that you can jump back and forth to the regular Photoshop and then back to Camera Raw, and just, it's a great feature of Adobe Photoshop, and it'll really make your photos look a lot better. Photoshop Camera Raw provides an efficient and intuitive way of photo enhancement for most projects. So for the most part, Camera Raw is all you're going to need. You're not going to really be doing that much intensive, photo enhancement or correction. The example that we're going to do in this tutorial is not a normal color correction. In other words, we're not realistically trying to enhance this, but rather a demonstration to show the tools and techniques of what Camera Raw has to offer. And so you see, this is the original photo here, and this is what we're going to do, which is very kind of over-the-top processing. You can see that, this is not a very realistic interpretation of this, but it is a much more dynamic and eye-catching version of this. And we're going to work with enhancement of highlights and shadow detail. We're also going to do some color correction, enhance the color of this. You can see the difference of how much more this pops off the page. The background has kind of been tinted back, a little bit of blue. Blue and orange always tend to work together as color combinations in photographs. And so that's what we're going to do. And once I finish this video, I will post this underneath, so you'll have a video of how this works. Okay, so in this, I have given you an assets folder that you'll download, a zip file, and it's here on my desktop. I've already clicked on the zip and expanded the file, and there'll be a folder that says Camera Raw. You'll click on that, and here is the original Tesla photo that you're going to bring into Photoshop. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is open up Photoshop. Now this is a JPEG. The photo is a JPEG, and you can't just open up a JPEG in Photoshop. You have to do a little kind of, I don't want to say trickery, but we're going to go to Open, and we're going to target this folder here on our desktop. We're going to click on the photo, and you can see that the format here is JPEG. So what we want to do is we want to tell Photoshop that we want to open this up as a Camera Raw image. So here is Camera Raw here. So we're going to change the format of this photo to Camera Raw. Now this is not a Camera Raw photo. It's still a JPEG, but we have to kind of tell Photoshop that it is a Camera Raw image, trick it to open it up in that interface. So I'm going to open this, and you're going to see that it opens in a different interface. This is a little bit different than what you're seeing in the normal Photoshop. You just kind of move my menus around here. Okay. So what we see here is an interface in Photoshop called Camera Raw. And what we're going to do is we're going to do all the things to make this look like that image that was on canvas. We have some basic tabs here. We have the basic tab, the curves, detail, color mixer, all of these things. Now these are all things that are also in Lightroom, because Lightroom, the program Adobe Lightroom, was designed from Camera Raw. Although Lightroom does many other things, basically it's Camera Raw. So you already have Lightroom in a sense if you're going to do photo manipulation. Okay, we also have, let me pull down my thumbnail here. We also have some tools in Camera Raw. Now there are not many tools here, but you're going to find that some of these tools do a lot of powerful things. Now we're not going to go through all of the tools and go through all of the things that it does, because it's too extensive and it'll take too much time. But what we are going to do is use the tools that we need to enhance this photo. Okay, one of the things that you'll want to do is you'll want to click down here where it says display and this little thing, and this opens up this Camera Raw preferences, and you're going to want to check Open Photoshop as a Smart Object. So you want to make sure that that's checked. I think by default it's unchecked. So check that and click OK. And then you'll get this little button right here that says Open Object. Basically what you're doing is you're converting this photo into a smart object. And a smart object is going to allow us to go back into Photoshop, the main interface, and then click the smart object and come back into Camera Raw. So if we need to do further enhancements in Camera Raw, we can go back and forth. Without that, once we clicked done, we're not going to be able to go back into Camera Raw if we have to make further adjustments. Okay, let's first of all go down to this basic tab, and the basic tab is really the tab that creates a lot of the enhancements. We have exposure enhancements, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, etc. We have all these little buttons and sliders, And the best way to understand this is just to kind of move these back and forth and see what they do. This is exposure. This makes it darker. This makes it lighter. And whenever you double click on these, they go back to where they originally were. So if you make some adjustments and you kind of move things around and you go, how do you get back to the beginning? Just double click the sliders and they'll always go back to the 0 point. Okay, highlights, shadows are the things that we want to talk about first. Like I said, dynamic range is something that is a range of tone, and it captures detail in that range. Detail in the highlights, detail in the shadows are always things that cameras have a hard time capturing. They can only capture middle tones. So you can notice here that we have blown out highlights. These are highlights that are, just kind of washed out. So we want to bring back some of the highlights, and we're going to take this highlight slider and move it to the left. And you can see right in the bright white areas that it starts darkening. Okay, and we start bringing back detail in that. But because this is a JPEG, there's only so much detail that we can bring back, because a lot of that detail is just not there because of the JPEG compression. JPEG is a compressed file format. Now the difference is if this was a RAW photo, we would be able to bring back a lot more of these highlight details. And it's truly amazing when you look at a RAW photo and how much you can bring back in terms of detail. But we're going to go all the way to the left with the highlights. The shadows we're going to also go all the way to the right with. And you can see these shadow areas, these very dark areas. When I move this to the right, you can see those open up. You can see that we start getting, actually, it starts getting brighter. We're not necessarily bringing back shadow detail, but and a little bit. We are a little bit. If you look into the deep, dark areas of the photo, when I move this to the right, you can see them brightening up. Okay, so we're going to brighten up all those shadows. Then we're going to come down to the whites, and I'm going to hold the Option key down on a Mac. And I'm going to click this white slider, and everything goes black. I'm going to move the white slider to the right until I start seeing little bits of light come out. Okay, all we want to do is just bring out the first little bits of light and let go. Okay, what that's doing is that it's bringing out highlights but not burning them out, not blowing out the detail. I'll do the same thing with the blacks. I'll hold the Option key down, only this time I'm going to go to the left and I'm going to bring out a little bit more black area than, with the whites we want to be very careful about how much we bring out. But with the blacks, we can go a little bit further, and then I'll let go. Okay. Now down here in the lower right is the before and after. So if you want to see what the before picture looked like, that's before, this is after. And you can see that it's really over processed. Look at all the detail that's coming out in here, before and after. Okay. After, we don't even see any detail in the lights or before, but after we see these little highlights here. Okay, I'm going to try and get through this quick. We can talk about this more, but this is not a photography class. In photography, I really go through Lightroom and Camera Raw extensively. But, and there's lots of tutorials online as far as processing in Camera Raw, so if you want to check some of those out. So highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. Okay, this is our exposure. Okay, darkening or lightening. Right now I'm going to leave it in the center. I'm going to up the vibrance. Okay, this is vibrance. You can see when I go to the right, the colors get much more vibrant. When I go to the left, it gets much more dull. So this is 0. I'm going to up the vibrance a little bit. I'm going to leave the saturation the way it is because it is very saturated. Again, oversaturated, way too much. No saturation is black and white. Okay, so we'll leave that in the middle. Okay, I'm going to slide down now, and I'm going to go to the detail. Now the problem is that when you bring out highlights and shadows like that, it gets very grainy, it gets very noisy. what we refer to as noise. So I'm going to click down the detail slider. When you click down these tabs here, the other ones disappear. We have sharpening, and I'm going to bring this up to about 70% sharpening. Okay, and all that does is sharpen pixels, sharpens the edge pixels. Okay, again, this is before and after. Now, it gets very grainy, so I'm going to take the noise reduction and I'm going to crank that all the way up to the 100. Okay, and it's kind of hard to see in this demonstration, but when you do this in class, you're going to see that it smooths out a lot of the edges here. This gets a little bit smoother. I'm going to also crank the color noise reduction up. Color noise is just kind of red, blue, and green pixels that you see, and it just makes it, when you zoom in, you can really see color noise. Okay, so that looks pretty smooth. It looks kind of still, way over the top, but I just want to go through some of these tools so that you can see what they do. Okay, then we're going to go to the color mixer tab, and I'm going to spin that down. And what I've done is I've used, instead of HSL, which it probably defaults to, I've used color, and then I've used this right here instead of these. Okay, I've used this last one here, and that gives us hue, saturation, and luminance for each color. These are this is the color wheel, and these are all the colors around the color wheel. And in this photo, we have several of these colors, not all of them, but several. We have lots of oranges. And so this is the hue slider of the orange. Okay, if I move it to the right, it goes more towards yellow. If I move it to the left, it goes more towards red. Okay, so you can literally change the color of a certain, a certain hue, a certain color. You can change that by moving these sliders. This is upping the saturation of just the oranges, nothing else. Okay, and this is upping the luminance or lightness of that orange or darkness of that orange. So I can make it a darker orange or a lighter orange. Now you have to remember that whatever orange is in the photo, all of the oranges will be affected. So there's a little bit of orange in these yellow lines right here. And so when I crank the luminance up, you can see how these lines brighten up too. Okay, but you see the dark shadows here? Even though I crank the luminance up in the oranges, the dark shadows still stay dark. Okay, so this is not a global color correction. This only affects that particular color. Okay, I can see these yellow lines here, so if I change the yellow to green, you can see how all of the yellows in this image will kind of move towards the greens. Here's the green areas here. There's not too many greens, but I can take green and I can saturate the green a little bit more. Okay, a little bit more saturation in that green. There's really not a whole lot of greens in this. I'm going to leave this the way it is. Okay, but that's what these do. Okay, these sliders will take whatever colors are in the photo, and then you can make adjustments to the luminance. Like, let's say this orange was too bright, or I can take the saturation down. It's too saturated, so I can start just kind of dulling that orange down. You see how it's kind of dulling the orange a little bit. All right, let's come down now, and we're going to, well, instead of doing the effects right now, what I'm going to do is I want to darken this background, okay? And what I want to do with the background is just kind of give it a bluish tone, darken it and give it a bluish tone. So in order to darken the background and not the car, I'm going to, again, go to that select subject. I'm going to use this tool over here in the toolbar. I'm going to click on it, and we've used this before. We're going to go to subject, okay? select subject. Remember, in the main interface of Photoshop, we use the magic wand tool over here, and then we click select subject up here. In Camera Raw's interface, we're using this tool here, and we're going to select subject. So when I click it, you can see how it selected what it thinks is the subject, and it did a really good job in this. And then I'm going to go to that subject here. It's represented here. This is the mask that it made. And whatever is white is what's going to be affected, and whatever is black will not be affected. So again, if I move the exposure down, it just makes the car darker, but it doesn't affect the background. Or I can make the car lighter. Okay. In this case, what I want to do is select the subject and invert the subject so it's just the background now that's going to be affected. So now I have the background affected, and I'm going to darken the exposure. Okay, so I'm going to pull this down and the background starts getting darker. You can see that, right? And the car just pops out of that background. Okay, like I said, this is not a realistic color correction. This is more of an advertising thing that we're doing to make it look more just kind of surreal and dynamic. So I'm going to pull this down about to here. And then I'm going to come down to our color temperature here, and I'm going to blue just the background. Okay, I'm still working on just the background because I still have the mask up. So whatever I do to all of these things is just going to affect the background. So I'm going to take this temperature slider and start moving it to the left to the blue. Okay, and you can see how the background is turning blue. Okay, now this is not realistic, I know, but this is just an effect that we're doing. Okay, and then I might even take the exposure down a little bit and darken that exposure so that this is really starting to pop out now, this orange car. And when I do that, you can see that this is represented by this little icon here. The fact that I have a mask on here is represented here. Now I can create another mask. I can create as many masks as I want. So now what I want to do is I want to brighten up kind of the wheels here. I want to just the wheels, nothing else. I'm going to go over to create new mask, and I'm going to use a brush. Okay, I'm going to click on brush, and my brush comes out looking like this, this brush. I can open up and close up using my scroll wheel. I can make my brush bigger or smaller. Okay, and this represents the size and feather of your brush. My feather is like at 100%. I'm going to bring the feathering down to maybe 50% or so. Okay, now you see the distance between the inner circle and the outer circle. That's what feathering does. Okay, this is feathering about 50%. When I go up to 100%, you can see that distance now is increased. That means it's going to feather out a lot more gradual. Okay, I'll bring the feathering down to about maybe 70% or so. That's fine. Then I'm going to make my brush smaller. I'm going to zoom in. Okay, these are your zooms right here. Okay, if I click 200%, okay, it zooms into 200%. Okay, I'm going to hit my space bar, and I'm going to come over to this black side here, and I'm just going to paint in here, and it's painting with this kind of orangish mask color here. Okay, and you can see that's a brush. And then I'm going to come over here to my exposure, and I'm going to brighten this up. Okay, and you can see how it brightens up that area that I painted. Okay, now I'm going to come over here to my front tire. Now if I wanted this front tire to be a different degree of lightness than the back tire, I would have to create a new mask. I'd have to have separate masks for the back wheel and the front wheel. But in this case, I'm going to use this same mask for the front and back, and they're both going to be affected by this exposure slider. So whatever I do here is going to affect both the back and the front wheel. So let me paint, okay, and you can see how it's getting lighter in here. Okay, And I'm just going to kind of paint. I'm clicking with my, holding down my mouse, and I'm just enhancing the wheel of that. And that's what a brush does. Okay. So I have actually two masks. I have the mask for the background and I have a mask for the wheels. Okay. Let me back out of this. Okay. I'm going to click on, let me get out of here. Go back to 100% there. Okay. Okay, so here I am. Again, if I click once, it goes to 100%. If I click again, it goes back. So if I went to 200%, if I click back, it goes normal, and then click goes up to 200%. So you can set your degree of magnification, any way you want. Okay. Unlike Photoshop's normal interface, you can't hold the Option key down and click and drag. Okay. I can't just, oh yes you can, I'm sorry. You can hold the Option key down and click and drag, and you can get into whatever degree that you want. So that's nice. Okay. Left, click and drag left is decrease, click and drag right or down is increase. Okay. Now, let's say you had to go back and make a change. Let's say this is too bright, okay? Your wheels are too bright. You would, again, go to your, this icon here, the masking icon, and you see your two masks. When you hover over them, it shows you that this mask, okay, it shows you in orange, okay, with this orange overlay, where you are. And then when you click on that mask, okay, I can click on this mask, and then I can take the exposure down, and it darkens that. Okay, so this will tell you what mask you're on. Okay, if I wanted to go back to the front mask here, I can do that, and then I can darken that maybe a little bit more. Whatever. Okay, now I'm going to click up here on this icon, and that takes me back to the normal interface of Camera Raw. Okay, I'm going to come down here to Effects, and what I want to do is I want to kind of burn the edges of this and vignette it a little bit. So I'm going to click down Effects, and under Vignetting, if I go to the left, you can see how the corners of this photo start getting darker. That's what a vignette is, okay? And that what that does is that kind of brings your eye more into the center of the photo. Okay, so with a little vignetting, I can do that. Under geometry, you can see that you have a lot of these sliders here. This is, again, you got to play around with this. This is like taking it and bending it backwards. Okay, let's say your camera distortion was kind of off and you need to correct it. So you can do that. Horizontal kind of allows you to change it, this way. It's almost like you're angling it left and right. Okay, a lot of times this will straighten things out that are crooked in the photo. When you take photos with wide angle lenses, you'll see that your vertical lines get very skewed. And if you want to correct them to be straight, you can use some of these. This is the rotation slider. This allows you to rotate. If you took a photo and it wasn't straight, like your horizon was crooked, you can take your rotate tool and change that. If you needed to crop this photo, you can go up to your cropping tool, which is under your tools here. This is the cropping tool. And just like in Photoshop, you can crop, your photo. Okay, you can crop it down. Okay, if you need to crop it to a specific size, you can, okay, this is set up to, certain aspect ratios, 4:3. Let's say you're cropping this to, put it in a particular frame size, like a 5:7 frame. You can click that, And now every time it automatically crops it to that 5:7. I'm going to go back to the full cropping. If you unlock this, you can crop this to any size you want, depending on what you want to do. Okay, you can do something like that if that is unlocked. But if you lock it, okay, we'll go back to full. And so now when you move these, they always are in that proportion. Okay, we'll leave that at that proportion. I'm going to go back here. Okay, now what we can do, if we're done with all of our color corrections, we can open the object now back into the original Photoshop interface. So I'm going to open object. And now you can see that we are in the regular Photoshop interface. You can see that we have layers and, all of that you're familiar with. Okay, here's our Photoshop toolbar and so forth. And now we can use things like, whatever tools we need. The clone stamp tool, or we can add text to this and we can create, whatever we want. I'll just maybe get my text tool out here and click and let's say the Tesla Roadster. Okay, and I'll select that and beef up the point size there and maybe position that right there. Okay, I'm gonna take my tracking to 0, open that up, and let's say that's what I want to do. Okay, from there we can go to File and we can save as a copy, and I'm going to save it on my computer. I can rename this. I'll save it as a JPEG, and I'll rename this Tesla advertisement. Oops. Okay, and I'll save it to the desktop. Okay, and it should come out here. There it is, right there. Okay, double click on that, it'll open in preview, and there it is. Okay, something very dynamic for maybe an Instagram post or whatever. Again, this is not a realistic representation of a color correction, but it kind of gives you an idea of some of the tools in Camera Raw. Okay, so that is Camera Raw. Now, originally we opened up a JPEG, but if you shoot in Camera Raw, like I have two photos here, one of our past dogs, Suki, and another one of some food. And the CR2 is the Camera Raw format of a Canon camera. And Canon is the camera that I have, and so when I set it up to raw photo, it gives me that file extension. And most of the photos that you shoot in your phone will have the JPEG extension, but you can change that to RAW, and I always shoot in RAW. So when I double click this RAW photo, it will automatically open up in Photoshop's Camera Raw. So if I clicked on this and double clicked it, you can see that I'm in Photoshop's Camera Raw, and I have, again, all of these tools to enhance this photo. So in that case, raw photos go directly into Camera Raw in Photoshop. If it's JPEGs, you have to do that little thing where you do File, Open, and then change it to the Camera Raw format so that Photoshop thinks that, you know, it's a Camera Raw image. Okay, we're going to do some of this in class in my color correction and photo enhancement Camera Raw demo. Probably do that in our next session, but I just wanted to have a video here that you can reference, and then you can play around with this. If you have any questions about some of the photos that you want to retouch, you can definitely hit me up, and I will help you with that. But this is a really cool feature of Adobe Photoshop. And again, Adobe Lightroom, if you look down here in my dock here, you probably can't see it because I'm not sharing my screen, but let me share my screen real quick so you can see it. If I pop this up, you can see right here that this is Adobe Lightroom, and Lightroom is very similar to Adobe Camera Raw. In fact, if I pop Lightroom open real quick right now, you can see that when Lightroom opens, you have in the Develop module here, okay, you have several of these tabs here that look the same. Okay, you have exposure, contrast, highlight, shadows. Okay, if I move down here, you have all of your color correction tabs and so forth. So if I go into Lightroom and I say open up one of these food shot things and go to develop, you can see how these sliders are very much like Camera Raw and Adobe Photoshop. I'm in Lightroom, which is an entirely different program, but again, this is designed from Photoshop. So this is the same interface that's in Photoshop. So you really don't need to do this in Lightroom. You could do it in Photoshop, but Photoshop doesn't have a lot of these other things that Lightroom can do. So I really recommend that you use Lightroom if you shoot a lot of photos and you want to do a lot of photo retouching. Okay, with that, let me go back and sign off, and I will see you guys in class, and we'll do some photo manipulation, photo enhancing, and color correction. Okay, see ya.